Well, welcome in once again, everybody. Thanks for joining us for what we think is always an exciting, informative, relevant edition of Pick Your Politics. I'm Dennis Silvers, along with, wait for it, my great co-host, Stephanie Phillips. And we've got a great show for you today. We've got a very special guest in studio, which is always nice for us to have that. And we love talking about what we're going to be talking about today, because as we have said on prior shows, Stephanie, judges, judicial things affect the lives of everybody, don't they?
That's right. They affect a lot, and most people don't know any of the judicial candidates.
Yeah.
Before the primary, I had all kinds of phone calls. Do you know this judge, that judge? And they just don't know. And I don't know if they just don't get to the events, or it's not. Seems like you guys are set apart from the voters sometimes. Yeah. But yeah, judges of all are very important.
Very important. That's why I always say you've got to vet everybody, okay? Whether they're in the judiciary, whether they're in the Senate, the Assembly, or whatever. You got to vet everybody, get their points of view, see if you agree, see if you disagree. If you get a chance to go to a meet and greet, go meet them, ask them in person. They want to meet you, and they want to talk about issues. So we have just the right person for you today. Let me tell you a little bit about Judge Ellie Roohani. She is a district court judge right now in Department 11. She's currently running for re-election on all the Clark County ballots in November. Ellie is a lifelong Nevadan who graduated UNLV and UNLV's William S. Boyd School of Law. Ellie spent her entire legal career in public service, fighting for child victims of sex crimes and many other violent type offenses. She has resolved hundreds of cases and has previously represented thousands of victims in both criminal and civil proceedings. So it's our pleasure right now to welcome Judge Roohani to Pick Your Politics. Thanks for getting off the bench, Judge, and coming to spend some time with us.
Thank you for having me. And Stephanie, I think that part of the reason people don't know a lot about their judges is they think, if I'm talking to a judge, I'm in trouble, right? Right. So they don't really, the idea,
good point.
Right? And it's a psychological thing. So
that's true. Yeah, they don't really want to know you.
Yeah,
they don't want to be in your car.
Yeah, at least formally. They don't want to know you, at least formally. Which brings me to my first question, Judge.
Sure.
What's the hardest part about being on the bench?
The hardest part about my job is sentencing criminal defendants. That's the hardest part, because you really do hold the life of a human being in your hands, and we're given a lot of discretion with respect to sentencing. I'm a former prosecutor, so I like to hear the voices of the victims and make them feel that they are being heard in our system of justice. But I also have a human being in front of me who's being sentenced, so I have to look at the sum total of all the things that got that person to that point, remembering that I need to give them hope to become functional members of society, while also providing just punishment for the bad thing that they did.
Yeah. Being a former prosecutor, I would think, or do you think, that kind of gives you a leg up on your competition?
It's different. I mean, I have criminal experience, which I think certainly makes me well suited for this particular department, because I do have a criminal docket in this particular department. I think that being a prosecutor gives me a different perspective. That's how I like to frame it. When you've dealt with a person on their lowest, worst day, not because they're losing money, but because this is literally their child who was raped, or the kid themselves who is, you're watching their interview and you're watching them break down, talking about their trauma and their victimization, it changes who you are as a person. And it changes the way that you think about the world in a good way, because you see the humanity of people, but you also see what we are fighting for in our system of justice. But on the other hand, if you've had a family member who's been in the criminal justice system, and I would like to, I do, right? I feel like a lot of people do. That also gives you a different perspective.
Yeah.
So feeling people being a part of their lives on the worst day of their life in a very real capacity that's not a money-based capacity, it just changes who you are. And I think that that gives me a very unique perspective that I think makes me an excellent judge.
Yeah. You alluded to the Department 11. You hear both civil and criminal.
I do.
Any preference between the two?
I like them for different reasons. I like the criminal. I sometimes say that it has a very schizophrenic vibe about it. There's a lot of cases, you know, you have to be very quick on your feet with criminal.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of written motion practice, so you really have to know your stuff the minute that you get on the bench, and you have to know the background of every single case in a way that's not written down on paper. Civil is different. Civil is very esoteric. It's, you know, I get to sit and think about issues and do the research and really dig into things in a way that the criminal docket doesn't allow for that.
Allow for that,
Yeah.
right?
But so I like them for different reasons.
Yeah.
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 Talking about sentencing and discretion. So I assume that there's sentencing guidelines for certain crimes. There's not.
We don't have
So-
guidelines. We have statutory limits.
Okay, so you take those, and what determines how do you say to yourself, well, this person is going to get this, or this person is going to get
Sure.
this, and
Good
how
question.
do you weigh that?
So there's that's why I say it's the hardest, because we have the most broad discretion in those. So we have, our legislature has told us what the sort of end caps are
Right.
for felonies and what's the maximum. I can tell you what I consider, and I think that most of the judges on the bench who have criminal cases consider. We have to consider the defendant, the life experiences that got them to that point. What is their upbringing? What is their mental health status? What is their substance abuse status? What is fueling the offense? We have to consider what happened, right? The bad thing that happened, I always tell people there have to be consequences for our actions.
Right.
When my 2-year-old does something she's not supposed to do, I put her in timeout. There's a consequence for our action. That's how the world works. That's how it's supposed to work. So thinking about what actually happened and what's commensurate with that act. Also thinking about the victim's voices. I think that our system has recalibrated a little bit in that we're giving victims a voice, which is important. But I represented child victims who sometimes adults think that child victims, not that they shouldn't have a voice, but that the adult voice is more important than the child's voice. I don't believe that. Sometimes a victim doesn't want punishment. You have to take that into consideration. That's
Wow.
important. That might be important for their healing. And so
Right.
I have to take that into consideration.
That's interesting.
You know, I take into consideration public safety. I take into consideration, how do I fix this problem? The unfortunate reality is approximately, I would say 50 to 60, some days up to 80% of the people who appear in front of me, their criminal conduct is being fueled by mental health and substance abuse issues. That's not shocking.
Wow.
Because that is a serious problem that we have in our society generally. So of course it appears
Sure.
at the same rate in our criminal justice system.
Right.
So I think to myself, I can incarcerate this person at over $100 a day, well over $100 a day, or I can give them the mental health and substance abuse treatment for significantly less than $100 a day. And as a result of that, I fix the problem so that nobody in the future becomes a victim of this particular defendant.
Depending on the crime.
Depending on the
Okay.
crime,
Right.
depending on the defendant, depending on whether they're ready.
Right.
But I think the last thing that I consider is I try to be consistent. One of the ways that our system of justice is just is when the law is applied the same way to everybody, the same considerations. And so if I have a defendant who stole $1 million and I gave that person 12 months, and I have a person who stole $3 million, they should get a higher sentence, right? It has to be commensurate. So I look at other similarly situated defendants. What sentences did they receive? What sentences are other judges imposing? These are all things that we take into consideration. The last other one that I would say is I give a lot of stock to what the attorneys tell me about a case. People don't realize is that the judges don't have all of the evidence in the case. The attorneys do.
Right.
So if I haven't gone all the way through a trial and listened to everything, all I have is the plea agreement and a little blurb that's maybe a paragraph long.
Right.
So I don't know all the problems with the case. I don't know why they dealt the case the way they did. I don't know the nature of the negotiations. I have incredible DAs and PDs who appear in front of me who I know work really, really hard. So I do put a ton of stock in what they say. So if they're telling me probation's the right thing for this particular defendant, I ask questions. We try to tailor it as best as possible to help that person. But I've been in the position where a judge blows up your agreement, and it's not a good feeling because you worked really hard to get to that agreement. And I think the judges need to give a little bit more stock to the attorneys who appear in front of them.
Right. So you've done a lot of sex crimes against children, and Las Vegas is one of the leading cities in the country for trafficking and those types of crimes. But we see the problem, it's getting worse. It doesn't seem like I don't know where the shortfall is there. Is it there's not stiff enough penalties? Why are these people not being deterred from repeating these crimes? And why is that still such a huge problem?
I don't want to speak to this specifically because I don't have the data to back this up, but I'm going to tell you what my experience has been. Whether you are, for trafficking in particular, sometimes we call it pimping. I like calling it trafficking because I think it's more of a, it's broader than just pimping. Because women can also traffic other women.
Right.
Women can traffic men, right? And so there's a lot of societal connotations with the word pimping. I don't like to use it. With respect to trafficking, it's a greed-based offense. We like to think of it as a sex offense, but the person who is trafficking the other person is typically not a pedophile. It's a person who wants money.
Right.
It's a person who is willing to resort to violence to get the money. So it's a greed-based crime. The other thing is the people who are being victimized are already vulnerable people. You're not being victimized. I'm not being victimized. A lot of it is young people who are already in a bad place in their life. They may be in foster care. They may have a bad home situation, and they're being preyed upon because of that. But separately, they don't want to talk. That person is not always getting what they want with violence. Sometimes they're getting what they want with love. And so there's this really weird trauma bond attachment with that person that we have to, as prosecutors, when I was a prosecutor, I really had to work hard to break that up and to try to recalibrate that person's brain to realize they were being a victim. And sometimes I didn't succeed, even if I got a conviction. So I don't know. I don't know fully the answer to that.
Maybe they're not being prosecuted. These cases are kind of slipping through the cracks and not being prosecuted as they should be. And maybe the penalties are not stiff enough. Of course, that's a legislature.
Yeah, I always tell you if you don't like what your penalties are, go talk to your legislature.
Right.
What I will tell you is there are a lot of these cases in the system. I know a lot of I worked with a lot of the folks who are on that team. They work really, really hard. The majority of prosecutions fall apart because the victims don't want to testify against their abusers.
Yeah, I could see that.
And you can't build a case around nothing,
I
right?
could see that as being a big problem. Our special guest this show on Pick Your Politics is Judge Ellie Roohani. She is on the ballot to be reelected as District Court Judge for Department 11 here in Clark County. And Judge, what are a couple of the problem issues as you see it with the judicial system here in Clark County?
That's a good question. I think the number one issue that's facing the courts right now is we have massive backlogs because we're working through our pandemic backlogs plus the backlogs that existed prior to the pandemic. But it's a circular problem that feeds upon itself. The judges are trying to get through a lot of cases. We're working really hard to do that. We are constantly in trial. When you're constantly in trial, your other cases are falling behind, right? Sometimes if you're not putting in the extra hours and the extra effort to get things moving. But the attorneys are fatigued as well. There are attorneys who have been in trial nonstop for months and months and months, and it's because they finish one trial in front of me, then they got to start another trial in front of another judge, then they got to start another right after that, another one. And we are being asked, the judges are being asked to hold everyone's feet to the fire so we can move these cases along, but it's this balancing act of, do I want this attorney to crash and burn and sacrifice their mental health and their sanity and their safety to the point where they can't adequately represent their client, or do I just want to move cases along? That's, I think, the number one thing that our court is facing. I think the other is, there's like 10 different ideas that are coming into my head right this very second, so I'm trying to prioritize which one is the next most important.
Well, just throw one out there.
Well, and I will. So I will say this: is we have a very new bench, and I mean that in the sense of we have a lot of new judges who are trying to figure out their style and are not just trying to build their own policies, but try to build a culture in the court, and that happens. It has to happen. Otherwise, you're going to have really old judges who eventually pass, and then you're not going to even have a judge. It has to happen. We have to build up new judges. But we're rebuilding the culture of the court right now. There's, I'm a newer judge, right? But I think that I bring something very important to the court, and it's a unique perspective. So I need to make sure that my voice is heard to build the whatever culture it is that we want to have going forward.
Yeah.
And this is a role of public service. We want to do what's best for the attorneys who are appearing in front of us and our constituents, who is you, it's the community, it's everybody.
Right.
People come to court when they have problems. They don't come to court when everything's okay.
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah. Speaking of mental health, so you go through, being appointed by the governor, you go through a rigorous application process.
That's right.
You answer questions about mental health and all these things. So depending on, and given the amount of discretion that judges have, obviously, before a judicial candidate is put on the ballot, should they have to go through a questionnaire at a very minimum and answer whether or not they have been in a mental health facility? And why, and what were those circumstances, and things like that. Should there be a psych evaluation for judicial candidates?
Oh, that's a loaded question. Okay. I think I have to back up for a minute to sort of explain what are the qualifications to become a person, to put your name on the ballot. Currently, the only qualifications is that you have been barred for 10 years, meaning you've not even that you've practiced, just that you've been barred for 10 years somewhere, and that you've lived in Nevada for 2 years. And that you can pay $150 to get yourself on the ballot. Those are the requirements.
It's a very low standard.
Low threshold, right?
Wow. Yeah.
And but with that being said, they are attorneys. They've been barred somewhere.
Right.
I think every single bar in the entire United States asks mental health questions. But if a person has been barred for 30 years, that question may have been asked 30 years ago, and we're not re-upped through the bar.
Yeah, and a lot happens
a lot can happen in 3 weeks,
Totally.
The other thing that we are dealing with is attorneys, like other folks in the community, suffer from substance abuse issues. We have an extremely high level of alcoholism in our profession, unfortunately, because of the level of stress and anxiety that attorneys, we take on the trauma of others. There's actual psychological phenomenon called secondary trauma, and lawyers are replete with it.
And for judges, it must be even worse.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But I think the other thing is just generally in our society, we have stigmatized the idea of getting mental health treatment. So do I think that there should be a test? Not if it's done at the cost of a person getting help. I want people to get help. I want you to be stable as my neighbor. I certainly want my judge to be stable, but I also want every person who appears in front of me to be stable. If we destigmatize the idea of mental health, it becomes a little easier. But when we're in this position, I don't know. I don't know the right answer to that. I can tell you that the vetting process for an appointee is extremely thorough.
Yeah.
It's not just my disclosure of have I ever seen a psychiatrist. It's also they have called the judges that I've appeared in front of. They say, "Hey, is she stable? Has she flown off the handle when she's lost? Can she control her temper? Does she have a temper?
Right.
Is she smart? Is she prepared? Has she ever shown up, intoxicated in some way in your courtroom?" They ask all those questions. It's a very thorough process. So.
But not for just the average candidate coming in, being on the ballot.
No, it's completely different. And there's it's completely in candor. It's completely different. And Nevada has this amazing, live and let live vibe about it, where people who came from nothing can make something of themselves.
Sure. And that's a good thing.
That's an American value.
It's amazing. Yeah. Look, trust me. Do you think that a little brown girl who was born in Pakistan as a religious refugee could have been a judge here today after going through public school in the Clark County public school system? And, that's an incredible story, but it's a Nevada story. It's a Las Vegas story, in my opinion. And I don't know. I really don't. I want to answer it fully. Obviously, I think we want stable people on the bench.
Right.
But people want to elect their judges.
I think that's more than a Las Vegas story or Nevada story. That's a great American. That's a great American story for anybody.
Well, I've lived the American dream. I tell people all the time, if you want to talk about what is the American dream, it is me and it's my life.
Look at Ellie.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. And you kind of hit on it. Have you ever lost sleep or been really bothered by a decision you've rendered?
Every time I send someone to prison, I have a hard time going to sleep. Because it's a life.
Yeah.
It's a human being. That person has a mom, and that person has maybe a son or a daughter, and certainly they have family who love them. It's not a decision that should be taken lightly. I absolutely lose sleep in the sense of I think about it. I continue to think about it.
Yeah.
There's people that I've prosecuted that I will call the defense attorney up months later and be like, hey, how's he doing?
Really?
I know he just got out. I know he is, in the halfway house now. How's he doing? Because we don't hear about it until they've done something wrong.
Right.
But I want to know, is this person succeeding with the tools that we have tried to give him? Yeah, he served his punishment.
Yeah.
But we have to care about people.
Right.
Yeah.
We live in a society where we want our... I had a conversation last night with the UNLV pre-law women. And they said, what is your strength? And I said, my strength is my humanity. It's not that I'm smart. I am smart. Of course I'm smart. I wouldn't be on the bench if I wasn't. But it's my ability to feel. Because you should not have judges who are robots. You wouldn't need human beings to do this job if it was just...
Agree.
So my humanity is my strength. My ability to feel is my strength.
Great. That's awesome.
And so yes, I do.
That's awesome.
Tell the folks what you're familiar with the remove or retain bill that was presented to the legislature. Do you agree with that? Should that be?
Are you talking about the 2010, the last time it came up?
Yeah, when you,
Sure.
Because judges, let's face it, they get on the bench, and there's a lot of bad judges that have been, there's corruption, there's judges that have violated people's constitutional rights, and it seems the disciplinary commission for judges, it's
Toothless?
you're policing your own, so it's a little difficult to really render proper punishment, I would say, with some of the things that some of these judges do that I've researched. But with remove and retain, it seems like we can get rid of some, because it's really hard to get rid of the bad ones once they're there. So do you agree with that? Should that be brought back around?
So there have been a lot of more recent murmurings about this in the legal community. It's probably the number one question that judges, current sitting judges, and candidates are asked is, should we appoint our judges and then have a retention election or a referendum election, basically? Or should we purely elect our judges to give everyone a chance? I was appointed, and as a person who went through this process, I can tell you that when you are going through the commission, it is not a political process. So people think that you have to know somebody who knows someone. I knew exactly nobody on that commission. I didn't practice in state court. I practiced in federal court. These are not people that I appeared in front of. These are not people I appeared against. So they had to look at me very objectively with respect to my skill, my ability, my reputation. Right? And they didn't know me from Adam. And then the governor from the top three selects one person. People are scared that that will become a political process. People are scared that because your dad is somebody, or your brother is somebody, or your mom knows somebody, that you're going to get that job. Currently, that is not the case. So I think it is an excellent process to use. But like I said, we got this vibe in Nevada where we want to say in the people who serve us. And so we need to continue to have that freedom, that voice for our community, to the extent that they want that voice. So yeah, it's a great process. You're going to get better judges through the appointment process, in my estimation. And then you will have some type of voice from the community to either keep them or get rid of them. If they're not serving your needs, then get rid of them.
And that should be a vote. that's up to the people. Whether if that judge is not serving the community and they're, violating constitutional rights and all these things that we see. We see things in family court and, there should be a voting process to where people, let's get rid of that one because they don't deserve to be sitting on the bench.
But what I will say is in the last cycle, there were many people who challenged people who they thought were not good judges.
All right. Yeah.
Or maybe they just had ambition and they wanted to be a judge.
Yeah.
So we have that process a little bit by the challenge. I don't know. I don't know what's better. I don't think that there's a black and white answer on this. I don't think that there's a good and bad. I think there's pros and cons, and everything's a balancing act.
Yeah.
And that goes back to people not really knowing the judicial candidates because, let's face it, people look at their ballot and they look at the judicial names, and if they've been around for any time at all, they recognize the current
it's a comfort
judge sitting there, and they're like, "Oh yeah, we know him. Let's."
And some of the judges some of the people on your ballot are going to be a family name, who may have exactly zero relation to the actual family, but you don't know the difference because you haven't done your research.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And that's why we always stress vet your people and see what they're all about.
That's what's good about this kind of setting where we can do a little 30-minute interview, basically, get it out there to the folks where they can get a feel and they get a feel for
exactly
what you stand for.
Exactly. Judge, what's the funniest thing that's ever happened in your courtroom to date?
Like funny haha or funny?
Yeah, I mean,
Like if someone passed out or somebody got sick.
That's not funny to me, and that has happened to me. Let me tell you, and it my heart broke. There was an attorney who had a medical episode, and he didn't realize he was having a medical episode, and I was legitimately scared for him, and I stopped the proceedings and we called an ambulance. I was like, something is going on, something is not right. We need to get to the bottom of this. That's not funny in my opinion.
Or
That's
maybe
scary.
somebody just tripped or.
But I mean,
It's usually, I'm a very lighthearted. I try to be lighthearted because our justice system, civil and criminal, is very. It's heavy. It's heavy, right? And
it's serious.
And it's hard for jurors to come into this space. So maybe not a funny haha. I think I'm hilarious, by the way, during trial. I ask for
you do. That's interesting. Well, we're gonna have to come in and watch you at work then.
I'm being absolutely facetious. I'm the least funny person in the world, but I try to make it light for my jurors. So in jury selection, you have to ask people. Do you know the attorneys? Do you know the defendant? Right. Do you know the parties? And then I say, okay, now this is the hard question. I hope nobody fails this test. I'm like, does anybody know me? And then I say, and I don't mean know me because you saw me on the side of the road smiling, on your signs. And then people start to click. They're like, oh yeah, that's why she looks familiar. That's why I know her name. I just try to make it light. It's really hard for people coming into the court system, and it's scary, and it's our job as judges, it's our job as lawyers to demystify this process and to make a scary process less scary. So nothing tremendously hilarious is coming to mind, but you got to make every day light. You got to make every day happy.
Stephanie, have you ever served on a jury?
I have.
Okay.
Yes, I did years ago when I first moved here. I did serve on a jury, but I was going to ask you. I just lost my train of thought when you asked me that.
Was it about me being hilarious? I know that's what it was.
No, it was something else. Now I can't even think of it. Go ahead, Dad.
No. We're getting a little short on time, but I want to ask you. Obviously, everybody's out campaigning, having events, meet and greet, knocking on doors, doing whatever. What are you doing to bolster your campaign, your re-election?
So I go everywhere that I'm invited. I think it's important that if somebody invites me somewhere that I make it a point to be there because these are my people, these are my constituents, these are the people that I serve, and I need to be a part of the community. What has been difficult to balance is doing the things where my heart is. And you can imagine community service has always been a part of my life, but I still try to carve out time to volunteer. So for example, this Saturday I went and I helped clean up a little bit of the historic West Side neighborhood because it's close to my heart. And it's not a campaign activity. I'm not marching in a parade, but I'm in my community. I'm helping my community. I want people to know me. So I go places, I introduce myself, and I tell people all the time, and I will tell all your viewers, please come watch me in court. Come to 3E whenever you want. It is an open courtroom. I believe in that fully.
That's what I was going to ask you.
Yeah,
was,
it is
do you welcome
absolutely,
people?
I mean, 100%, I think it's your fundamental First Amendment constitutional right to come and watch your judges and to come and watch the proceedings. And it's important. It's important for people to do that so that they can learn about our system. And then you can see what kind of judge I am.
Yeah.
And you can see if I'm telling the truth about having good temperament. You can see if I'm telling the truth about being prepared. And if you want to do it from the privacy of your own home, we have blue jeans. So you can call my chambers, you can get the login, you can sit in your pajamas and drink your coffee, and you can still watch.
That is great.
No, that's good.
You know, and it's, we are not going to get a really great judiciary until our electorate is educated about our judiciary. So I try to make that as transparent as possible.
Yep. Yep. Website for your campaign?
www.ellie, E-L-L-I-E, the number 4, judge.com.
Okay.
They can also follow me in the community. I'm on Facebook at Judge Ellie Roohani, District Court Department 11. I'm on Instagram at Judge Ellie Roohani. I'm on Twitter at Judge Roohani.
Wow.
I will tell you, I don't.
You're a star.
Well,
You're a
I don't.
star.
In fairness, if you message me and I don't message you back right away, I don't do my own social media. Because
Okay.
Yeah.
You don't have time for that.
I don't have time. I'm a mom. I got 2 kids. I got a husband. I got a family. My grandma lives with me, and I have to.
Oh, wow.
You know,
So
so
you're
when
busy.
I work, 10 hours a day, and then when I'm
Wow.
done, 10 to 12 hours a day, when I'm done working, I go and I go where I'm invited, and then I go spend time with my family. So if I don't get back to you immediately,
Don't take it personally.
don't take it personally. I will get back to you, just perhaps not immediately.
And I have to say, I listened to an interview that you were doing the other day, a week ago or so. And just so all of our viewers know, she rattled off the Constitution, all the amendments, like she has it memorized. And I was thoroughly impressed.
you
She
don't-
ran down the whole thing.
It is the United States Constitution is the supreme law of the land. If a judge doesn't know that, I don't know what they're
Yeah,
doing. So.
that's a very good
I've
point.
never heard a judicial candidate go through like you did, and I thought that was great. I
That's-
loved it.
You can-
that's-
you can
I was
quiz
gonna
me
have you.
after.
I was gonna have you do that again, but we're out of time.
You can have me
we're-
back, and I'll tell you all about
Oh,
it.
well, definitely. No,
Absolutely.
definitely. Well, if we come see you in your courtroom and Stephanie knows I'm going to ask this, do you serve anything? I mean, any food going on?
I
or
don't.
is
I
it-
don't do snacks in the
Nothing.
courtroom. But what I will say is if I
Boy.
know that you are there observing and you tell my marshal that you want to chat afterward, I'll come off the bench and I'll have a conversation with you. And to the extent that I can answer questions about what I did and why I did it, I'm happy to explain that.
What do you guys do for lunch? I mean, you're in the middle of a trial. Do you have a lunch?
Oh, I'm on the trial diet. I was a trial attorney. You eat Altoids and drink some coffee and powering through that.
He will not show up.
No.
There's no food.
I'm
yeah.
out. I'm out.
No,
Forget
because
it.
part of it is remember when I'm done with trial, I got all my other cases, so I'm still jamming work in.
It's hard.
Responding to emails and signing orders and reviewing
It's
things for the next
hard.
day. The trial diet's a real thing.
Yeah, it's hard. Anyway, unfortunately, we are out of time. Thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for coming in
Thank you for having
and
me.
spending some time. We wish you the best.
Absolutely.
Anything we can do for you, let us know.
Absolutely.
And do absolutely great. So that's going to wrap it up for this edition of Pick Your Politics. For Stephanie Phillips, I'm Dennis Silvers. Thanks for tuning in. Remember that and go out and vote, more importantly. So until then, we'll see y'all next time. So long,
Bye.
everybody.
See you later.